In the vast landscape of fantasy literature, J.R.R. Tolkien's Middle-earth captivates readers not just with its wizards, elves, and ancient evils, but with an uncanny sense of realism. Born of Tolkien's deep love of mythology, linguistics, and history, Middle-earth was shaped during and after the World Wars, drawing on his experiences as both a soldier and a scholar. Middle-earth is imbued with tangible details, familiar landscapes, evolving cultures, and the weight of forgotten eras that echo our own history. Unlike in many fantasies, where magic is the decisive factor against the forces of evil, in Middle-earth it is a powerful force with limits, costs, and uncertainty. This video explores why Middle-earth feels so grounded, despite its wizards and magic. Most readers of The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit take a look at a map of Middle-earth and immediately think of Europe. That reaction makes sense, and it isn't just a coincidence of coastline shapes or vaguely familiar mountain ranges. In a letter to Rona Beer, Tolkien wrote, "I have, I suppose, constructed an imaginary time, but kept my feet on my own Mother Earth for place. Middle-earth is not my own invention. It is a modernization or alteration of an old word for the inhabited world of men, the Ikimini. In other words, Middle-earth is not a separate universe so much as a reimagined version of our world." Tolkien reaffirmed this geographical approach in a letter to Charlotte and Dennis Plimmer, placing Middle-earth's key locations in relation to European and Mediterranean latitudes. Hobbiton and Rivendell about the latitude of Oxford, Minas Tirith near the latitude of Florence, and Pelargir at about the level of ancient Troy. The story's trajectory ends in what is far more like the re-establishment of an effective Holy Roman Empire with its seat in Rome. By anchoring the narrative in real Earth-like measurements, latitudes, rivers, seasonal cycles, and the logic of travel, Tolkien gives readers a world they can recognize. When Frodo and Sam pass the Argonath or trudge through the Dead Marshes, the terrain feels real because it is real geography. That realism extends to magic, which is historicized within the same real, Earth-like logic. In Arda's earliest form, the world was flat and symmetrical, until the titanic struggle between Morgoth and the Valar reshaped it, creating seas and a new landmass. Valinor was physically accessible at first, but after the Great Flood-like destruction of Beleriand, what remained was only a westward sailing journey. After the downfall of Numenor, an Atlantis-like catastrophe, Valinor was removed from the world entirely, reachable only by the Firstborn. Any voyage west ultimately returns one to Middle-earth. The magic that transformed Arda can be read as a euphemism for humanity's changing understanding of our world, from divine and accessible blessed realms to a more restricted map of a flat plane and finally a modern globe-centered worldview. Within Middle-earth, magic functions more like historical memory rather than spellcasting. Middle-earth is structured by what earlier ages left behind: ruined kingdoms, lost roads, broken alliances, fading lineages, and religions that have had centuries to reinterpret events. Even when wizards appear, they do not simply replace history with enchantment. They navigate through historically formed cultures that constrain what power can do. Tolkien was, by his own admission, historically minded. In a letter to a real-life Sam Gamgee, Tolkien described Middle-earth as the objectively real world. The theatre of my tale is this earth, the one in which we now live, but the historical period is imaginary. Rather than fabricating an alien past, he deliberately infused real history, languages, cultures, geographies, and even personal experiences into Middle-earth. This infusion gives the fantasy the weight of lost heritage, rather than mere invention. The point is not merely that Tolkien drew on real history, but that he built a world that acts like real history. Geographies accumulate scars, symbols persist, languages drift, and traditions distort the events that first created them. This gives the fantasy its weight. It feels like a lost heritage rather than an invented novelty. The Shire is the most intimate example. Tolkien based his hobbit holes on the rural English Midlands of his childhood in Warwickshire and the Black Country. Its gentle life feels like a half-remembered England transposed into prehistory, but is instantly recognizable. In the north, Arnor carries the faded grandeur of ancient Rome, and in the south, Gondor feels like a declining Byzantium. Tolkien described the crown of Gondor as very tall, like that of Egypt, but with wings attached, not set straight back but at an angle. Tolkien himself describes Numenor as his version of the myth of Atlantis, and deliberately drew on Egyptian imagery in his Gondorian architecture. Furthermore, Tolkien compares the ruling stewards of Gondor to the Carolingians of France, who descended from Charlemagne's line. The white-walled city of Minas Tirith, the line of stewards ruling in the absence of kings, and ancient Numenorean heritage all echo the rise and slow decline of classical empires. The Rohirrim, by contrast, draw deeply from Anglo-Saxon tradition. Their language is rendered in Old English forms. Their poetry and names come from the Mercian dialect Tolkien knew intimately, and their horseman culture recalls the riders depicted in the Bayeux Tapestry. Yet Tolkien was careful. His Rohirrim are not exact copies of any historical people, but rather a blend of Anglo-Saxons, Goths and Scandinavians. They are an imaginative echo, close enough to feel ancestral, distant enough to remain mythical. Even the wars and battles carry the imprint of real history. The Dead Marshes, with their sunken corpses and flickering lights, were inspired by Tolkien's own nightmare experience of the Somme battlefield in 1916 during the First World War. The siege of Minas Tirith resembles the Battle of Vienna, replacing the Polish hussars with Rohirrim cavalry. Many scholars have compared the Battle of Pelennor Fields to the Battle of the Catalonian Fields, where, according to some sources, King Theodoric I was trampled to death by his own men after falling from his horse. Despite the displays of magic between Gandalf and the Witch King, the result is a world whose history feels lived in, as though Middle-earth is a forgotten root of our own European past. By weaving real historical logic into mythical prehistory without copying it outright, Tolkien achieves what he called the inner consistency of reality. The extraordinary becomes believable because it grows from the ordinary ways humans remember and reorganize experience. Empires rise and fall, cultures inherit and misinherit, languages change, and landscapes keep record of violence. Middle-earth's realism does not come from maps and history alone, it also emerges from speech. As a professional philologist, Tolkien built his Middle-earth tongues from real-world foundations. First, he established sounds and grammar, then let sounds and names evolve exactly as they would in a real language over time. Quenya mirrors Finnish in its soft consonants, vowel harmony, and musical flow. Sindarin draws on Welsh, complete with soft mutations. For Rohirrim, Tolkien used Old English, making the Riders of the Mark feel like a living echo of early medieval Anglo-Saxons. Even the dwarf's secret tongue, Kuzdul, draws from Semitic languages like Hebrew and Arabic, with triconsonantal roots. Cultures follow the same logic. The Rohirrim and Gondorians are allies, yet remain alien to each other in custom, emphasis, and memory. Gimli and Legolas begin as rivals not because the story demands it, but because neighbouring peoples inevitably accumulate centuries of grudges, myths, and misunderstandings. Poems, songs, and place names act as memory terminology. They preserve what people choose to remember, romanticize, or deliberately forget. In Tolkien's hands, languages and cultures are not extra world-building, they are the mechanism by which Middle-earth earns its legitimacy, behaving exactly like the real world we inhabit. Tolkien's master grounding device was making the central protagonists of his novels the least magical people in the setting, ordinary folk living on ordinary English-like soil. Hobbits are small, comfort-loving, and almost entirely without magic. They do not cast spells like wizards. They do not have the magical wisdom of the elves, nor the magical craft of dwarfs. Their greatest gifts are stubbornness, cheerfulness, and a love of good food and pipeweed. By anchoring the epic in Bilbo, Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin, Tolkien forces the cosmic struggle to be measured against the scale of ordinary life. Whenever the story leans into wonder, Gandalf's miracles, the Palantiri communication, even the eerie paths of the dead, Tolkien pulls the reader back down to Hobbit reality, sore feet on real stone, the constant problem of finding second breakfast, the physical panic of hunger and cold in Mordor. In Middle-earth's biggest moments, the least magical characters turn the tide. A simple gardener, Sam Gamgee, carries Frodo up the slopes of Mount Doom. The act is more moving than any wizard's duel because it is rooted in love, loyalty, and sheer physical endurance, qualities that exist in our world too. Hobbits do not feel like tourists in a magic world, they feel like simple Englishmen, planted in a familiar kind of lived space, people whose stability comes from everyday habits, not otherworldly gifts. Their groundedness keeps the legendarium from floating off into pure myth, and instead makes its epic stakes land in the same register as human endurance. By the Third Age, magic was never a convenient superpower. It is subtle, dangerous, and usually comes with a price, precisely because it operates within the real constraints of the world. By making magic rare, costly, and often unreliable, Tolkien prevented it from overshadowing the narrative's emphasis on endurance, choice, and consequence. The clearest example is Gandalf's sparing and strategic use of magic. As one of the Astari sent to Middle-earth to aid in the fight against Sauron, Gandalf possesses immense power, but the Valar do not permit the Astari to reveal too much of this. Thus, Gandalf tends to use his magic as a last resort, rather than a first response. Gandalf's fireworks at Bilbo's party are a rare moment of whimsical display, but don't alter the world's fundamental realities. More profoundly, Gandalf's confrontation with the Balrog in Moria exemplifies the high cost of magical intervention. Wielding his staff and Narya, he declares, "You cannot pass." The duel is not a flashy, consequence-free victory, it is a catastrophic clash that results in Gandalf's death. Upon his return as Gandalf the White, the Valar allow him to reveal more of his power, yet his role is often more that of a guide and counselor. He lights the way in dark places, or summons eagles for rescue, but he never uses magic to bypass the hardships of travel, hunger, or moral dilemmas. Saruman, another of the Astari, provides a stark contrast and a cautionary tale of magic's unreliability and corrupting cost. Initially a wise leader, Saruman's pursuit of power led him to pervert magic into something industrial and destructive. Saruman didn't rely on overt spells, but instead harnessed a form of alchemy to create explosive devices, essentially gunpowder, although Tolkien himself was deliberately vague on this point, resisting the label in his private correspondence, and preferring to leave the substance unnamed, that breached the walls of Helm's Deep. This magic is unreliable because it is tied to his hubris. It amplified destruction, but did not guarantee victory, as the Ents' uprising and Rohirrim's resilience ultimately undid his plans. Galadriel, the Lady of Lothlorien, embodies the fading, ethereal side of elven magic, deeply tied to nature and inherently costly due to its transience. Her mirror is a prime example of unreliable magic. It reveals visions of what might be, had been, or might never come to pass, but offers no certainty. When Frodo gazed into it, he saw glimpses of the Shire's peril, yet these insights provoked more anxiety than clarity. Emphasizing that such magic did not solve problems, it complicated them with ambiguity. Galadriel herself wielded Nenya, which preserved the timeless beauty of Lothlorien, shielding it from decay. However, this power is bound to the fading of the elves, and she knows that destroying the One Ring would diminish her own abilities, hastening her departure to the west. In a pivotal moment, when Frodo offered her the One Ring, Galadriel resisted the temptation, envisioning herself as a Dark Queen. Her refusal highlighted the moral price of magic. Embracing greater power would have corrupted her, just as it had done to Saruman. This theme becomes darker with the One Ring, which is arguably the most important magic object Tolkien gives us. In principle, it offers mastery. It can dominate minds and bend wills. In practice, it is both costly and treacherous. The One Ring does not deliver a victory button, it infects the process of seeking victory. Boromir's failure shows how quickly the One Ring turns desire into catastrophe. Even those closest to destroying it, Frodo and Sam, are constantly destabilized by exhaustion, fear, and the One Ring's pressure. Sauron can't just snap his fingers and win, not because he lacks power, but because Middle-earth is not a world where willpower alone determines outcome. Magic here behaves like an adversary and a trap, not a tool. Magic is never allowed to erase consequences or override the physical realities of Middle-earth. Contrast this with much modern fantasy, where mages fling fireballs daily without repercussions. Tolkien's magic feels like a real force in a real universe, subject to the same limits of physics, morality, and geography as everything else on the globe we call home. Another reason Middle-earth feels believable is that Tolkien treats morality and psychology as real operating forces, rather than plot conveniences. His characters never act like interchangeable heroes who simply do the right thing because the story demands it. Instead, their choices arise from recognizable reasons: fear, loyalty, pride, grief, fatigue, longing, and temptation. The One Ring does not merely curse or grant power, it works as a gradual psychological takeover, feeding on desires that already exist in the wielder. Boromir's fall is tragic because we see both his virtues, patriotism, courage and devotion, and the exact conditions that make his collapse plausible: despair, a sense of failure, and the desperate belief that he must avert catastrophe by any means. Gollum's fractured personality is horrifying because we watch the One Ring slowly do the same thing to Frodo. Even Sauron is not a stereotypical villain who is evil for evil's sake. He began as a Maya who longed to order the world for good, but Morgoth corrupted this desire into a need for domination. At its core, the story is about the temptation to use power, even for good. Gandalf and Galadriel refuse the One Ring because they know it would turn them into another Dark Lord. The most heroic acts, Sam's mercy toward Gollum, Frodo's pity, are quiet victories of will against despair. This internal moral realism makes the magic feel secondary. The real drama never concerns who wields the biggest fireball. It concerns who refuses to use it even when it would be easier. The magic may be spectacular, but the real plot happens inside choices shaped by believable minds, where good is not the absence of temptation, but the ability to refuse what temptation turns you into. The last and deepest grounding element in Tolkien's Middle-earth is what he called the Long Defeat. Everything magical is waning. The elves are sailing into the west, the dwarves are dwindling in their mountain halls, and the Ents are slowly turning back into silent trees. Even victory over Sauron does not restore a lost golden age. Time presses forward and the world grows ever more ordinary. This melancholy springs from Tolkien's Catholic faith fused with the fatalism of northern mythology, the knowledge that one must fight for what is right even while knowing the world will eventually break. Magic is never a rising tide of wonder, it is the last fading light of a dying age, like legends and myths are to us. More videos on Tolkien and Middle-earth are on the way. Make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see them. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we will catch you on the next one.